Tip number one is to really understand the concept of restraint as it applies to music as a whole, but specifically for drum programming. And as a producer, I think your entire journey is a process of learning two things, which is one, you should really not overthink things, and two, less is more. And that is like the fundament of what I've come to understand about production as a whole, but specifically that's what goes into my drum programming process for 2024, and I've been seeing some pretty good results with it, so I want to share the process. But tip number one is absolutely like the concept of restraint, and it is 100% based on the two ideas that less is more, and if you're overthinking, that's a signpost that you've gone too far and you need to turn back and go in the other direction. So before we move on to tip number two, let me play the sample that we're going to be using today. Tip number two is the traditional trap bounce. You can program your drums however you want and you can do whatever you want, and there are no rules. But what I've observed is that there is a particular type of bounce that a lot of really good producers tend to build their drum programming off of. It's not to say that they won't do extra things. It's not to say they won't pull certain things out, add some things in, kind of add their own flavor to it. But there's a certain kind of outline or structure to everything they do that gets them like really good results. So that's what I'm going to show you right now. So the first step is programming your snare or your clap, just whatever is your main heavy sound that's going to be hitting on the three. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. So every time it hits on the three, you have like your main sound. And this is like pretty intuitive stuff, but it's important to understand that it is this simple. And this is like the most important thing you can do is keep it this simple. So then the next thing we'll do is program the kick. Yeah. Okay, cool. There can be a little bit more variation with kick patterns for sure, but the most typical kind of bounce you'll see is something like this. The most complex thing you'll see is something like this. Sometimes it'll look something like this. And of course you can pull like certain sounds out, so maybe it's not as heavy. And you can even be a little bit tricky with the way your bounce is set up. Like you can kind of go for some of these and beats. And this one is on an and beat as well. But all of it is really built on this very like basic structure, this right here. Like producers like Wheezy, I've noticed, tend to do something more so with their 808s, but kicks usually follow the 808 pattern. So it'll be a kind of a pretty simple bounce like this, but then there's so much room for them to do a lot of really cool things because they keep like this structure the way it is pretty consistently, if that makes sense. I like that, so I'm going to duplicate that pretty consistently all the way through. And maybe for like a bit of variation, and a lot of producers will do this, or at least I've noticed that I get good results when I do this. It makes the beats more interesting when I do this, is just add a little bit of variation, something like that. Maybe it's different, or in order to build energy, maybe I don't have as many going in the first time. So really the TLDR with all of that is that you don't want to just program a bunch of random kicks for no reason. Like, of course you can do that stuff. There's no rules, but like, I'm just trying to give you the formula, if you will, to start getting some pretty good results, with the metric for that being the quality of the beats that you output, right? Anyway, moving on. So we've got the hi-hat. So again, just open up a hi-hat and program your basic two-step, which you can do coming into the channel rack, right-clicking and clicking fill each two-step. It seems so basic, but like the most basic thing is going to get you the best results. And then so I'll do something where I'll just give them a little bit more like bounce through velocity basically, and give it more depth. So I'll add some variation in the velocity of the hi-hats like that. And like, but again, it's nothing crazy. It's not really extra. And then I'll just duplicate that and it's very repetitive. And so that adds a little bit of bounce because of the difference in velocity over time of the hi-hats. So it makes it sound slightly less monotonous. And I think an important note to make is that like I rarely, like if you've listened to my beats, you know it rarely comes out like at the end sounding very, very simple. But the thing that I've learned is that you can make things seemingly more complex by starting with a simple sketch. That's the so important, and I want to make sure that I make that clear in this video, because that's the whole point that I'm making this video. For example, like a really good artist, the part of the drawing or the painting that they would get caught up on would not be the sketching part, I would assume. It would be further down the line of the creative process. Like we want to get to the point where we can just get an idea out very quickly. And so you really just want to start with that very, very simple outline. So with that being said, the very simple outline for my open hats is just going to be this. I'll show you right now. So basically these are all the spots I'll put them. Although my theory with it is that you can program basically 4 on the floor and then just pull out what you don't like. So this is how I think about it. So maybe like every other, and then I'll just duplicate that over. This is what I'm doing in my head as I program, but I've done it in this process so many times that I can just do it in my head without having to do this. But if I show you this, then you'll understand how the bounce is achieved at the end and how it kind of like matches up with other like professional producers. So let's just take a listen. Still, it's better, but it's still a lot, right? So maybe I don't want that second one. It's in getting better, but it's still just kind of sounding busy. So maybe like and now we're at a place where I'm content. And then I'll just duplicate that over. Open hats are an interesting thing that you can put on and beats. And honestly, I think I'm gonna do that. That's actually really, really hard. But like traditionally, you'll see it done more so the way I did it at the beginning, where it's just like 4 on the floor. And if you want to get really intricate with it, you can start using and beats. You can start doing interesting things like I'll do slides with my hi-hats, my open hats sometimes. And that's hard too, but that's again, I don't want to get too busy. I don't want to get too cluttered. I don't want to do too much, but you can do a lot. But all of that is based on that very basic fundamental structure overall, but specifically for open hats, that 4 on the floor concept. So tip number 3 is to program the root note. Whoops. So tip number 3 is to program the 808 on the root note. Now, again, if you've heard my beats, you would know that they're not necessarily so simple, but all of the complexity, and I would imagine it's like this for a lot of good producers, all of the complexity is derived from a simple structure, a simple sketch. If you're noticing a common theme, it's that we want to sketch an outline and then come back and fill it in. A lot of the beat block, a lot of that like anxiety to create comes from getting caught up in the beginning. But if you can build momentum by just sketching a good idea from the start, you'll be amazed at how much creativity can spill out. I'm really speaking from experience, so if I sound like I'm getting excited, it's because like I hope that like the concept can actually help you get some creative ideas out in 2024. So, oh, another really important note about 808s is that I program them following the kick, like pretty much always, and that's just based off of what I've learned from producers I really like. They do that, and then I've noticed in interviews and in their breakdown videos, they say pretty much the same thing, that they get the best results from just, you know, that combination of the kick following the 808. Then you can build complexity into that structure, and they will do that, but I've noticed that it's pretty congruent with what they say to like what they actually do. Wonder Girl's a good example of like that kick following that 808, but then, you know, she'll do the crazy slides and like other interesting things with her 808s, but like she does have like really good like tight structure to her stuff, I've noticed. And if you're a listener of Wonder Girl, you'll kind of like know what I'm talking about. All right, so even though there's no kick there, I'm gonna add that note. just because like I like the way it sounds for now. I might change my mind, I might not, it depends. All right, then we can bring that down and we'll be good to go. And then we can come in here and we can tweak our envelope so we can get even more tightness with our 808. And doing all of that is going to allow us to control the note length and the way it plays. And then we can even add some slides, honestly. Like we can slide down to that G sharp an octave away. Like that. Nah, that's hard. Now we can add an octave note off that root note right here from that C sharp, and we'll just go up to that C sharp at the 6. Something that I wanted to make a note of before we move on, the C sharp chord is this right here. Those are the notes. This would be C major, C minor, C sharp minor. This note, all I did was use a note that is in that chord. Again, I got lucky. And this melody is only following one chord. It just makes it that much easier. That's really all you have to do. And then the variation just comes in the different like ways that you can apply the very little amounts of music theory that you know, if you happen to know it, but you really don't need it if you can find that root note. So the chord changes to this over here, a 6 chord in the C sharp minor scale to this. So all I did was just follow those notes in the chord. So it goes from here to like that. Right, so that's all I'm doing, and then I'm resolving it by sliding back down to that note that's on that one chord, and that's it, basically. It's simple stuff. But like a beat sounds dope and hard when you keep it simple. When you try to like do too much, that's when it just sounds busy, and it just sounds like another cluttered beat, basically, is what I've learned. Step number 4 is saucing up the hi-hats. This is where I come back into the basic 2-step pattern that I programmed for the hi-hats back in tip number 2. And I'll just begin to add a little bit more character and variation to the pattern to make it interesting. This will add to your drum bounce. It will add to the overall like interestingness, uniqueness of your beat. But I want to make a note that it's not necessary. Like we all know there are platinum placements that are absolute bangers that just follow the 2-step pattern, or even more simple, you know, like a 4-step pattern, for example. And that's hard. But the point with this step is that that's where you want to sauce it up. That's where I sauce it up, because I don't want to get caught up in trying to do too much on the hi-hat when I'm just getting started with my drum programming. I kind of want the process to like just keep moving, and then I'll come back to it and sauce it up. Now, sometimes I'll do that like while I'm programming the hats, but that's just because I've practiced the structure over time. So practice makes better. Another tip is that if you're having trouble trying to figure out where you want to add variation to your hi-hats, try to think about it in terms of like where your big sounds are hitting. So the big sounds are like your kick and your main snare. So kick, and then that main snare that's hitting on the 3, right, from the basic pattern in tip number 2. And then just focus on ways that you can use the hi-hat to impact the hit of those sounds. So for example, let's start with the snare actually. So something really basic that we could do is just come here to the 6-beat grid snap and then just highlight both of these hi-hats and then hit Command plus U on, because I'm using a MacBook, but it would be Control plus U on a Windows computer, and it'll chop it to the grid, and then we can kind of drag the velocity like that. And that just makes it sound so much harder because of like the way those sounds come together. That could be the Haas effect. It could also be the concept of syncopation. I've also seen people call it synchronization. Whatever it is, it just sounds cool when the events are synced up and they kind of like have a relationship with each other. And that's a really cool thing that you can do with your hi-hats. So I'll make this even more interesting. Like I'll do something like this. and I'll change the grid snap, but like I'll change the direction. And actually I probably want more of them. That's hard. You could do it where you're using your hi-hats to lead up to it. So we could use that same grid snap and do something like this. And then maybe just like a really basic bounce here at the end. Yeah, I like that a lot. Let's take a listen and see how we can relate it to the kick. So maybe like right before this kick, I want to just like pull one out and leave a little bit of like breath on that and beat. Right? It's like 1 and 2, and that's like really dope just to give it some space. And it could be something simple like that. And then really, I like that right there. Just keep it simple like that. Actually, I'm going to move this because the open hat is pretty much doing the same thing there, but I'm going to use the same idea somewhere where the open hat is not. And that's the way I kind of think about it. Right, like maybe right there where the kick hits will make more sense. Yeah. And maybe change the pitch on this. Yeah. Tip number 5 is adding in accent snares and percs. And I do this at the end to complement the bounce of everything else, because like I feel like that's the purpose of those things. So the first way that I usually do that is I'll just duplicate my main snare and I'll try to find areas where I can use that to add bounce. And the most common places you'll see bounce snares programmed, again, it could be anywhere, but the most common places are like this. Right, so usually I won't do it. That sounds a little bit busy, but I'll kind of try to pick my spots with that at first, and that's cool. Yeah, I like that. The reason I clone it is because it makes it easier to pull that snare out during certain sections of the arrangement, which just allows me to add more variation without doing more complicated drum programming, right? So it's like I'm doing drum programming through the arrangement of my beat, if that makes sense. All right. And then I program percs with pretty much the same idea. Something like that, like that. With that, I'm just picking a spot where it'll fit in. There's no like hi-hat roll, there's no open hat. And I feel like that doesn't really clutter it, and it kind of adds to the bounce. It adds to the overall flavor of the beat. It adds something, it doesn't take from it, it doesn't make it, it doesn't take from anything else. That's pretty much all you need. You could fill it up with a bunch of stuff, and there are different bounces. For example, there's drill bounces where you'll have a bit of a different structure. There's jerk bounces, there's house bounces, there's all these different things you can do in terms of drum programming that still fit within that R&B, pop, trap, hip hop sphere of things that we do. But the important thing I think to understand is that whatever that traditional structure tends to be, and this traditional structure is pretty transcendental, if I use that word correctly, meaning that it's not so limited to one genre as one might think. Anyway, whatever that tends to be for whatever you want to do, that's a really good place to start. And then maybe following this order of operations will be very helpful for programming good drums. So with all that being said, I'm going to mix and arrange this so I can finish it up and put it in my beat store. I'll drop a couple of links to a mixing and arrangement guide down below so you guys can check out a process for that. Let me know in the comment section down below if you want me to drop some new videos on those concepts, because I would love to. Thank you so much for watching. Check out this video appearing on the screen right now because it will help you get better at melodies, which a lot of producers struggle with, and I don't want you to struggle with that because you're a homie. I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for stopping by. I love you. Peace.